You're listening to Rise Radio. Rise Radio. Sharing the good news of Jesus Christ across the world.
The world today, as you may see around us, is sadly getting very dark, and there's a lot of people out there that are in fear. They have great concerns about the world we live in today. I'm speaking to Wendy Scott. She's Season Watch radio host on KPRZ.com, and she's also a lecturer at the university. I've decided to invite her on to discuss with us some of that hope that we have and how to communicate that with other people around us, and also what are some of the main questions that she's come upon with skeptics who don't believe the Bible is the truth. Of course, there's so much indoctrination in universities today. And so welcome to the show, Wendy Scott.
Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate this opportunity.
We see so many rough things going on in this world. How do we communicate to people around us that there is hope?
You know, I find one of the first things that really makes a difference with whether people will listen to us or not is to actually be joyful ourselves. And that's not easy these days. As you were mentioning, the world's kind of dark. We see things as Christians that maybe others aren't, either they're not picking up on or they're pretending it's normal. But a lot of people just stuff their emotions and their fears deep down. It's that underlying fear. And I've found that the way to open somebody's trust is to be just joyful myself as much as I can, even in rough circumstances. And that's the thing, is people don't expect you. People expect everybody to go on a tirade. You go on social media now, everybody's going on a tirade. Everybody's about hate, calling people out. Nobody's humble. Nobody can admit they're wrong. I mean, the qualities in a Christian are the salt and light that Jesus talked about that draws people to us. And so I say the biggest thing is, you know, as much as, I mean, we all fail, but every day, wake up, don't leave the house without praying and connecting with God, and just say, Jesus, help me to represent you today. Fill me with that joy. Anoint me again for whatever's ahead. Help me to be that ambassador for Christ. And lots of times you don't have a specific plan, but the first thing you can do is to be that salt and light of joy. And people are drawn to others because it's a mystery to them. How are you so joyful? And yet, you know, we're not putting each other down. So I think, first of all, that's the first step. Just have that big smile. When I pass people on the, you know, wherever I'm walking, and when I pass them, I look them in the eye. And you have those few people who are not looking at their phones. They look at you and you smile, and that just lifts their spirits. People are looking for others to, you know, acknowledge them. The little person out there, the little people really need encouragement. So I'd say just representing Jesus with that salt and light, that constant joy, no matter what, that ready encouragement, that's what opens the doors first. People go, hey, you're different. And they get to trust you. I think that's the first step, because if we can't live a life of joy, who wants to listen to us, right?
I suppose it's contrary to the world's understanding that there could be peace in such circumstances. And is there a particular way that, if there's listeners out there who are trying to speak to their relatives or their friends, is there a particular opener that you would have in terms of opening up the conversation?
Yes, definitely. First of all, we have to lay down that track record. So I do street evangelism or different kinds of stranger evangelism when my outreaches, and God anoints those. He just opens a door of opportunity, and I get to just say stuff that nobody else will say to them because we're strangers. When it's our friends and family, it's different. I mean, even Jesus said, you know, a prophet is not without honor except in his own house. Well, there's a reason for that, because they've got the goods on us. They know us. They've learned how to shut us out and to maybe just see us as ordinary, and they don't feel like they have to listen to us anymore. So I go back to the same thing. The first thing is you have to have the long game with the people in your life, to be trustworthy, to have a good character, so that whenever they see you, whatever circumstances they see you in, you are level and have that good, trustworthy character. You don't say one thing and do another thing. I mean, because you can say whatever you want, but if you're living a life of kind of a hypocrite, they won't listen to you. That's the first step. Yeah, it takes a while. People are so surprised when you admit you're wrong. Nobody will do it anymore. With the people in our lives, we're going to step on their toes. We're just a bunch of humans. We've done things that hurt feelings, or they perceive it as hurt feelings. And we have to have the courage to mend those fences very humbly. When we have that track record, first of all, then we've gained their trust. They can't really find anything on us to reject us. And so that means that, one, their heart is more open because we're trustworthy. We walk the walk. They see that God has made a difference in our lives. We're different. You have to start there with the people in your life. And I pray now, if you've got people in your life right now, you have to do the hard work of praying. It's like I always think about, you remember with D-Day, when they were invading, Normandy, they didn't just send the troops right onto the beach to get slaughtered. They first pounded the beach with the heavy artillery, and that's prayer. And we can't be lazy Christians. We have to, if there's a stronghold to tear down, as the Bible talks about, tearing down of strongholds is a real thing. It's in a spiritual battle, and the people in your life have strongholds against the Bible, against Jesus. It's the natural state of things because Satan goes about like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. And he has fooled us, fooled our family into not believing in God. So you see, you have to do the hard work first. Pray for God to tear down those strongholds. Pray for opportunities with that person and be steady all along. And so I just want to say that first. There's no quick fix. You can't just go up to someone that maybe you have a bad relationship with and then challenge them. So I have plenty to talk about opening those doors, but I really want to make sure that listeners understand that's where it starts. You have to play the long game, and you have to hit the beachhead with prayer that tears down the strongholds and opens opportunities, and wait for that opportunity. So I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to talk a bit more about some of those quote unquote strongholds that you mentioned, especially in this generation. As I said at the start of this podcast, that there are some indoctrinations that have happened in education and in the culture, in the media, and we're going to address some of those points. I will just pick up on one thing you said. For me, sometimes it can be a struggle. We're in a battle between the flesh and the spirit. So what advice would you give when we do want to overcome that, and maybe sometimes we find ourselves being drawn into some frustration or maybe even anger with what's happening in the world, and the frustration that can so easily start to come into our lives at this time?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, we're all going to get frustrated. We're a bunch of humans. That's the point, is it's how we manage it. And, the Bible says, be angry, but sin not. So there is a righteous anger. Jesus got angry. He made a whip and was whipping everybody out of the temple because it's a righteous anger. So if we have a righteous anger about things, I mean, I get really angry. I hate lies. It's funny because before I gave my life to Jesus, I could lie. At least I thought I was a good liar. And now I hate lies. I hate them, and they make me so frustrated. I hate it when people lie about God's character, about the Bible, and it just boils up in me. But it's not that. It's, what do we do with it? You think about those jujitsu masters or whatever. You use the power of something and put it in the right direction, and we just get better at it. And if we get out of hand, or maybe we say something we think isn't right, we just go back later and say, you know what, I blew my top on that, and I shouldn't have. And it frustrates me. Just be willing to be humble. We can't get mad at ourselves for making mistakes, but we do. It's going to get there, and we just keep reading the Bible, because know the word, be able to pull those. Like I always think of a quiver. of arrows. And we have to fill our quiver with the word of God to help us through all of those times, all of those challenges. And when we fall, a righteous man falls 7 times, but gets back up again. And it's okay. We grow, we're growing. It's how we handle it. And if we can handle it in humility, that's the way. Our enemy is pride. And so that's the start of it. And we just do our best to model it,
Yeah, I think the difference is we have conviction, right? Whereas we're not perfect yet.
Yeah.
We still have the sin nature, but it's that when we mess up, and we will, and I do for sure, is that we're convicted.
Oh, absolutely. And if you think about it, the Bible says to walk in the Spirit and not in the flesh. You will not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. And the reality is we are going to blow it. The world doesn't blow it. They don't blow it. They just sin because they like it and it's okay. And they give themselves permission. For us, we go, oh, I shouldn't have done that. God, I'm sorry. So you're right. Completely different condition of the heart. We don't justify our sin. We repent and then we're good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
what are some of the main arguments that you hear for why people that you meet reject the Bible? I know we've had a lot of science, falsely so-called, with the Darwinianism, and maybe some scientists claiming that things like the worldwide flood never happened. What are some of the main obstacles you come across when you talk to people about the Bible?
What's interesting is we've been indoctrinated in lies, but those lies don't have a foundation. And once you see that, it's the emperor's clothes, once you see, oh my gosh, they actually don't have a foundation for their lies. I find it's really easy to cut to the quick. And so this is how I talk to people. I don't know where they're at. And this is something, first of all, that you can do with your friends and family. First of all, I always like to ask people, hey, let me ask you, if you got run over by a T-Rex today, I always like to make it funny. I don't want them to think about it. If you got run over by a T-Rex today and died, would you go to heaven? I think with friends and family, anybody you encounter that God opens an opportunity, I think asking them, if you died today, would you go to heaven, is a great way to, everybody answers the question. I find that's what's remarkable about it. People will answer the question and they'll either say yes, or they'll say, I hope so, or they'll say, I don't know, or they'll say no. I've had lots of people say, no, I won't. And then, from there, you can follow up. That's how sometimes you find out what a person's perspective is. So maybe there's somebody who, maybe they're kind of a loose believer in God. They'll say, I don't know, I hope so. And then you can give them the gospel. It's simply by faith that Jesus Christ paid for our sins. We could talk about that more in depth, that we all sin, we all fall short of the glory of God. Heaven's perfect. We can't go to heaven the way we are because we'll pollute heaven. And so God left heaven, put on a man, so that he could die in our place and pay for the sins so that he can cleanse us and bring us into heaven. And so that's obviously the fast version. So the people who say, I don't know, I go, well, would you want to? Would you like to go to heaven? Again, that's where you kind of find out where they are theologically. Questions is the best way to go. Maybe they'll say, well, I don't really believe in heaven. Now you know where to go from there. Or they'll say, I'd like to, but they don't have a clear picture of it. And so whatever they say, some people will say, yes, I'm going to heaven. And I'll say, okay, well, how are you getting in? And they'll say, oh, I'm basically a good person. And then you tell them, well, that's by whose standard? By your standard or by God's standard? And so then you go through again, God's standard's very high. You have to be perfect. How are you doing on that? You feel like you're perfect. And of course, they usually laugh and say, no one's perfect. And I say, yeah, that's it. That's the problem that God has. He loves us, but he can't have us pollute the kingdom of heaven. And so you can go through that with people, and we could slow down and break that down. That's the first thing I like to ask when I engage people. Some people, when they answer, "Oh no, I don't even believe in God," that's where I go to my next step, which is what you're saying. The obstacle for a person who does not believe in God is generally they've been indoctrinated. They don't have to, because science has answered how to, that we didn't need God to create everything.
I was going to say, if I was someone who came to you and said, why should I believe that the world was created by God? Because science has disproven that now. What would be your key answers to that statement?
Yeah. So I like to ask questions with questions. What's great about that is you put them in the position of rethinking. We don't want to be in a position of defending every little thing that they throw at us, which we can, but sometimes those are little offshoots that don't get us anywhere. So it's good to kind of have certain things in mind. So I always ask, first thing I say, okay, well, let me ask you, since you believe in science, do you believe the universe created itself out of nothing? So you think about
how do they usually respond?
Well, see, that's the fun part. It makes them think, because they're used to starting with the Big Bang. And the Big Bang avoids that question. The scientists don't let us think about where matter came from. So sometimes people, they'll think about it. I get everything. I get people who say they're very scientific and they'll say, yes, I do. And I'll say, really? Because that breaks the laws of physics. You can't get something from nothing. It's never happened. We don't have a single example of it. That's not very scientific. That breaks the first law of thermodynamics, the law of conservation, that matter is neither created nor destroyed. And so I make them think about that. I gave them a scientific principle to see that, well, if you're depending on science, that's not going to help you. All right. Mm-hmm. So there is you cannot have something from nothing. So then I usually will say, well, look, where did matter come from? You have to explain where something is eternal. Either matter is eternal or a God is eternal. There's no other option. And we already know that matter is not eternal, that matter is breaking down. That's the second law of thermodynamics. We know that everything is breaking down. Stephen Hawking famously. Entropy. Stephen Hawking, in his famous book, A Brief History of Time, was asked, I don't remember, page 153 or something like that. He was kind of responding to the question, well, what happened? I'm paraphrasing. What happened before the singularity, which he likes to start with, the singularity for the Big Bang? And he goes, well, at this point, the laws of physics break down. We don't know what that configuration might be. Well, what's he saying? He's saying we can't explain where matter came from. So we have to start with the singularity, which is all of the matter in the universe got together one day and blew up. That's the Big Bang. It doesn't explain where matter came from. So you see, I've just proven logically that you either violate your own beliefs in science to accept the evolutionary or the Big Bang theory. You either violate your own laws of science or you recognize that something has to be eternal. And the logical answer is that only God is eternal. And they'll go, oh, well, where did God come from? So I don't have to explain where God came from. God is supernatural. He's outside nature. He created the laws of nature. He's eternal. And we look at the configuration of the world, the laws of physics, all the laws, they show everything had a beginning. So something had to be the beginner. So it's pure logic. Yeah,
and so this stands in the face of the idea of everything actually evolving and getting stronger in those ways. And, because the idea of entropy is that everything is actually breaking down gradually, which would be the result of the sin coming into the world, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's what they call it, time's arrow, entropy. Everything is breaking down. Stephen Hawking, in another part of his book, I like to use him because people have heard of him. In another part of his book, he describes that at some point in the future, there will be no more matter or energy left available to do any work because it's all breaking down. We'll see if it's going to all break down in the future. Eternity is very long. It should have already broken down. You see, eternity is forever. You can't avoid it. So obviously everything had a beginning. And you don't
Yeah.
even have to be super scientific. You just go, a kid knows you can't get something from nothing. A kid knows that. You show the person you're talking to that to believe that everything came out of nothing and created itself out of nothing is supernatural. It's beyond the laws of nature. It's an absolute impossibility. But the worst part is now you don't have anybody to explain the creativity, the directive process. Everything appears to be created very specifically. And so you have an appearance of design, and yet you're going to claim that everything was just always here. Matter was just always here, and nobody designed it. Well, that doesn't actually fit our observations at all. See, it's very unscientific.
Yeah, I've heard it likened to throwing a tin of paint at a canvas and getting the Mona Lisa.
Yeah, but it's worse because the reality is that where'd the paint come from? Where'd the canvas come from? See, you don't get anything to start with. You have nothing.
If someone said to you then from that, show me evidence that there is a designer in the creation, what kind of examples would you give specifically to show that?
Well, people don't often ask that because they know there's design. But for instance, I like to point to, I wear an actual watch, an actual analog watch. It's very simple. I'll point to my watch and I'll say, okay, let's say you're walking out in the desert and you find something like this watch. You've never seen a watch before. And you see this watch on the ground, you pick it up, it's ticking, it's moving. And you go, oh my gosh, look what the desert made. Is that going to be your logical conclusion upon finding a watch, even if you don't know what a watch is? And of course they laugh and they go, no, of course, I don't even for a moment believe the desert can make a watch. And it makes them see how silly it is. And I say, but look at all the things that you would need to make a watch are probably in the desert, all the minerals, everything like that. They're all here. And so, you have to understand that you can make a watch. You can look up online how to make a watch. Anybody could make a watch. It's possible. But the problem is that nobody can make the simplest life form, the very simplest life form. Nobody can make it. Nobody can construct that. We know everything that's in it, but we can't make life. It's way more complex than a watch. Anybody can make a watch when you look at a watch sitting in the desert. And no way would you believe that the desert created that. And yet it's all there. But we believe that life, which we cannot even create ourselves, life just came out of chemicals that one time, abigenesis, life out of nothing. We can't even make a ribosome. All life has ribosomes, so all life has DNA. DNA is a language. And it's a complex language. It gives instructions on how to create the thing, how to grow. DNA appears in all multicellular animals. DNA is in every cell, and it has the blueprint for creating the entire animal or the entire life form. I said, so you look at something in a watch and you laugh at the idea, oh, the desert made the watch, and yet it's way more feasible than even the simplest living cell, which we still cannot create from scratch, even though we know all that's in it.
So important for people to hear today, I'm sure, with as we said, so much indoctrination, and I'm sure it gives people hope, maybe a spark of hope when they hear these things, because there's nothing more depressing than these lies, right? Because they don't lead to actual hope at all, do they?
No, they don't. That's exactly it. That's Satan's goal, is to lie. He's a father of lies. And the first thing he said when he encountered Eve was, well, did God really say this? Right. And he's been doing it ever since. And, we can look at the Genesis account, everything. Every scientific challenge is actually just a bunch of hot air. All the science is on the side of the Bible. It's all on the side of the Bible. That's a series I'm doing right now on my radio show. I'm going systematically through creation account and discussing the evidence that reveals, wow, I mean, we really actually have all the science on our side. Then you can believe everything the Bible says, everything from the beginning. Once you believe that, You have the winning truth. And we have to hang on to that. That's where the hope comes from. And when I talk to people, I've talked to people who maybe grew up in the faith a little bit. They had to go to church when they were kids and they kind of believe, but then college, stripped it away from them, or high school. And I ask them, I'll ask people, hey, if I could prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that God created everything, would you consider believing in him? And that's where you find out where people are. That hope that maybe it is true. And if it's true, then that person, you tell that person, this God who created everything, created you for a love relationship because he loves you. He's actually paying attention to you every day. You matter to him so much that he wants you to come into his eternal kingdom. And he's laid down his life. He's paid the price for you. The God who created everything out of nothing has paid the price for you because he loves you so much. You're so valuable to him. You think you don't matter in this world. You matter to him. You're precious. And once you can tie those two together, that is logical that God created everything. There's actually no other option. Then you can share the hope. This God who created the universe loves you so much, he laid down his life so that you could come and be with him.
Right, and that's truly world-shaking truth, isn't it? And
it is.
I know that there's a lot of discoveries being made in terms of archaeology and biblical history, especially in places like Israel. And Ken Ham and people like that, they talk a lot about some of this evidence for Genesis and for the Bible. What specific evidence do we have for the likes of the global flood, which is obviously quite a big story in the Bible, a big event in the Bible that many people know of? What specific evidence would you point to that shows that there was in fact a global flood?
Yes, well, I love that you mentioned Ken Ham. They have a famous saying there at Answers in Genesis. How do you prove the global flood? How about billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the world? And so I love that phrase. They repeat it often enough so that the average person knows about fossils. And fossils are only created when some sort of specimen is suddenly covered by a heavy load of waterborne sediments. That's what we're looking at in the fossils. I mean, there's other kinds, but the kinds we're talking about. And you look at, there's so much evidence. There's herds of animals that have huge graveyards of fossils. It's exactly the evidence we'd look for. Wherever you are in your state, chances are there's sediments that are exposed that show. I live in San Diego, and so we have cliffs. We have Sunset Cliffs. All those cliffs, you look at the White Cliffs of Dover. You can point to things all around you. You say, look at that. Those sediments are higher than the water. The only way to lay down sediments that high is for the water to be that high. You can't bunch up water in one place. So if it's very high to create the White Cliffs of Dover, then it was once that high all around the world. And when you look, fossils themselves testify to a world covered in sediments. And there's some very good resources out there, but I like to start with that because people are all familiar with fossils. I say, hey, look, if a cat died in your front yard, is it going to turn into a fossil? And people realize it won't. I say, yeah, you have to cover it with a heavy load of waterborne sediment. So if you're looking for evidence of the worldwide flood, it's everywhere. It's the top of Mount Everest is covered in marine fossils. The Bible explains in Psalm 104 that God ended the flood when he caused the mountains to go up and the valleys to descend and the water flow down into the basins that God had created for them. Well, how scientific is that? The mountains are, right to this day, rain hits the mountains and it flows down into the oceans. And God explained it in Psalm 104 right there, how he ended the flood by causing mountains to suddenly rise. And we find mountains all over the place. They're young mountains, and they show evidence of sudden uplift. I like to point to the Grand Canyon. Everybody sees the layers of the Grand Canyon. Most people can visualize the Grand Canyon in their mind. All the layers from the bottom to the top are flat contact layers. They're very flat. and they go all the way around the canyon. And so when you look at those flat contact layers, you'll notice that they're explaining that the Grand Canyon represents hundreds of millions of years from the bottom to the top of these epochs, of these ancient seas coming and going over hundreds of millions of years. And yet you look at those flat contact layers, there's no erosion in between the layers. There's no gullies, no valleys. Well, I mean, you expose any surface of the dirt for 100 years, you're going to get erosion. You're going to get trees. You're going to get soil creation. You're going to get roots down into it. There's no evidence. You look at it and it looks like a one-time deposition over a period of time. And the evidence does not support an interpretation of the fossils as a record of what lived, because the fossil evidence shows that the world initially started with diversity. Even the Cambrian, the paleontologists call it a Cambrian explosion because there's 35 body types that appear suddenly without any precursors. It represents all the different body types, including vertebrates. Boom, right there, first level. You've got the nautiloid squid, Cambrian explosion, first level. The nautiloid squid has an eye as complex as a human, and yet they try to tell us that the eye evolved over hundreds of millions of years. Really? Well, it looks like the squid got it on the first try. So none of their evidence actually supports evolution. It actually is evidence. Their fossil evidence is our evidence of a global flood, and it doesn't reveal any of the stories that they tell about it.
Yeah, and of course you get by the way, that's incredible. Thank you for sharing all of that.
Oh, awesome.
I've seen online some of these skeptics, the atheists, they will argue back to some of this stuff and they will say, well, no, like that could just be a series of local floods, what you're describing there. So there's always an argument.
They'd have to explain. Even geologists recognize that. So the theory by creation scientists is that the Bible seems to describe the land initially created as one mass with the ocean all around it, and there was one mass. And it appears during the flood that when God caused the fountains of the great deep to break up, that there was a great geological upheaval. That's why there's a lot of volcanism that occurs concurrently with laying down of sediments. It's beautiful because you have volcanoes actually piercing through the layers of sediments. It's just, the evidence is amazing. So it shows they're happening at the same time. Well, The first layers that were laid down before the continents were broken up. The layers are the same at the earlier layers, and you find them across the continents. The later layers appear different, so it shows that they were broken up. So there's really no evidence. When you look at the massive, especially United States, because we have a lot of dinosaur fossils, we have a lot of exposed areas where you can get to it. We have huge, like thousands and thousands of square miles of one long, like huge sediment layers laid down. I mean, this is not a local flood, and they can be tied at the earliest layers all the way around. So, I mean, we have all the evidence. They're just telling stories. We just have to stop and recognize, no, there's no, they can't even point to one transition fossil. Even Darwin himself says, look at after, I'm paraphrasing, if as time progresses, they don't find these transition fossils, then this theory is incorrect. Well, here it is, like 100-something years later, we don't have transition fossils. In fact, we have less than we did when Darwin, when they thought they had a horse series in America. We don't have that. We've actually lost. We don't have a single transition. What they have is ridiculous. They're afraid we're going to figure it out.
Yeah, and what do you think about there's been multiple attempts to find the Ark of Noah. There's a group that's out there researching. I've seen one of the guys involved in the team that's been on a few news channels talking about a recent scan they did, and they reckon they found some evidence of corridors under it's the one on Mount Ararat.
Yeah.
Do you think, well, firstly, do you think there's credibility to this one?
So things like the Shroud of Turin and Noah's Ark. Look, we know there was a Noah's Ark. We know there was a shroud that covered Jesus. Whether or not we have them doesn't change that they existed. So we can't really expect an artifact to last that long. But the neat thing is that God actually can make artifacts last that long. I mean, he's really good at challenging our every doubt. And so there definitely may still be Noah's Ark up there. It was made out of some pretty good wood that lived a really long time back then. It could be. If we don't find it, though, it doesn't change the fact that we have all this other evidence. So we shouldn't like put our hopes in it in terms of, people are still going to be skeptical, even if they find it. I'm not sure that they're going to let us find it. I mean, that's in Turkey, and they're not up for that. But I do have a book, if I could recommend a book that helps address Noah's flood and even the question about the ark. Can I name that book?
Yeah, please.
Okay, it's called Untold Secrets of Planet Earth Flood Fossils. You can get a lot of the science ones. I think Answers in Genesis probably carries it. I know that Institute for Creation Research, you can just get it even online. It's by Vance Nelson, Untold Secrets of Planet Earth Flood Fossils. They actually give accounts of people who said that they've seen the Noah's Ark, and they're very good accounts. They also they show the sediments and the fossils and all the evidence to support Noah's flood. I mean, if you hand this to a skeptic, it's a great coffee table book. Keep it in your house, hand it to a skeptic. I mean, after a while, you're like, oh my gosh, it really challenges your skepticism. So I like that one. And it also talks a little bit about sightings. In fact, I think there was some people on a Russian expedition during World War I who had discovered it, and they thought it was some point of protection or something like that. So during World War I, there's accounts of a huge group of Russians that went in there and found it. I don't know if it's true or not. It's a pretty compelling account, but I recommend people get this because you don't want to sit there and memorize stuff. Maybe you're uncomfortable rattling off stuff the way that I've kind of gotten to. But getting a book like this is great, and all the other resources are great. So I can't remember all this, but here, why don't you read this? Why don't you look at this? So
yeah, that's great advice. Thanks. And I know when you go around museums, you see all these different fossils and artifacts that they show in there, and they have labels on there saying this is 6 million years old, this is 8 million years. So, and this really stands in the face of the modern ideas in terms of carbon dating and various things, to say that the world was created in 6 days, right?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is, so carbon dating is only dates organic matter. Carbon dating's fairly accurate. It can be cross-contaminated, so it's not always 100%. So carbon dating will date something. Maybe you find an artifact, a piece of cloth or something like that. You can carbon date it, and it'll be fairly accurate. The thing is, though, they've done carbon dating, so they don't tell you this. They've done carbon dating on coal. So they believe that the majority of coal was laid down millions and millions of years ago, and yet there's carbon in all of it. Well, there shouldn't be any carbon. The way that carbon degrades, there shouldn't be any detectable carbon in it. Yeah, that's what makes it coal, is that there's carbon in it. And so carbon dating actually proves that coal can't be millions of years old. It flies in the face of that. So the other thing is radiometric dating is used to date rocks, but the breakdown or the half-life is so long, we've never, ever been able to test it. They've got 3 main radiometric dating methods, potassium, argon, and 2 others. They're the 3 main ones. And every time they test something that's known, like we knew when a volcano erupted, we know when the lava came out, we have dates on that. I mean, not only is the dating off by, millions to, at one point, one was 1 billion years off. Not only are they off by millions of years, so they can't date anything of something known, but they disagree with each other. And so it's like having three clocks in the house, and you have to figure out which one's right because they're all different. Why would you use a clock at all if you can't figure out which one of the clocks is right? So they talk a big game, but the reality is they don't have science on their side. They're afraid that we're going to figure out that it's just a bunch of smoke and mirrors. It's just a story. They try to, you know how they date the layers? They said, well, we know it took millions of years for life to evolve, so we have to create a geologic column that we can date. You know, when we see a certain fossil, we'll say this is 300 million years old because we know it would have had to come back then. But they don't tell you that dinosaurs, which supposedly went extinct, and then mammals evolved because it fills the void of the dinosaurs going extinct. They don't tell you that that researchers, paleontologists routinely encounter huge loads of mammals buried with the dinosaurs, so much so they just ignore them. They don't want to study the mammals. And so it's all smoke and mirrors. What kind of a story can you say? You can't say mammals evolved from dinosaurs when all these sites are showing mammals and dinosaurs buried in the same strata. You can't. So it's all lies. They're afraid we're going to figure it out.
Yeah, so you talk about the smoke and mirrors. Do you think that is primarily because of cognitive dissonance within the unbelieving scientific community, or do you think that there may be some involved who are purposely covering certain things up for a specific reason?
Yeah, well, it's absolutely purposeful. The people who set out to negate the biblical narrative were not, they were clear about that they wanted to explain the world without God. And those are the ones that took the lead on evolution and studying things. They weren't even necessarily great scientists. So, for example, they tried to identify index fossils so they could create this geologic column. And they decided that since shells appear in all the geologic column that they were making up, that they would use shells as an index fossil to help them date which strata they were looking at. But they were trying to create this sort of evolution of these shells, and they didn't know anything about them. The actual experts in the shells and the animals were critical of how they were trying to categorize animals. Well, that's basically where we get our geologic column today. They made it up like in the 1850s and so on. And they weren't even experts in the things that they were basing it on. So it's really, it's on purpose. Now, we have a lot of people that are raised and indoctrinated into evolution. We're not allowed to talk about the possibility of creation. So kids never, ever, ever hear evidence for creation, that it's much more solid, because they never hear that. They go, well, this is what I've been taught. This is what I believe. So you got a kid who grows up, becomes a researcher, and he's believed it all his life. And now all of a sudden he wants to be a researcher. Well, he starts to see things that contradict what he's been told. But now he's in. That's his job. He wants to keep his job, so he keeps his head down, and he just ignores those things. And people tell him, "Oh, we just ignore that." So you see, it's a self-perpetuating thing. Even people, I think it takes a lot of courage to break away from the scientific community once you've grown up in it, and that's just how Satan works, isn't it? He makes everybody scared to break free from the herd.
Right? Yeah, and of course, once the biblical narrative is clearly true to people, then they're going to start to question more about the Bible, I'd assume, like who Jesus is and salvation. So I can see why there might be a spiritual battle in that, especially in terms of Genesis.
I mean, if God created everything, if it's so obvious that God created everything, that now you're responsible to him. So Satan likes to put those smoke and mirrors up, distract us.
Yeah, and they say that some people like to deny creation because if they were to admit it, then it means they have to confront their sin and the fact that they need a savior. Yeah.
So I remember I told you I had that question. I asked people. I've asked. I was on a college campus once sharing. This guy got really mad at me. He was a science teacher, and he said, "Oh, you're the ones that are, indoctrinating our kids not to believe in science." I thought, gee, I think it's the other way around. Anyway, I asked him, "Well, if I could if I could prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt by your standard that God created everything, right? So he's claiming to be a scientist. Would you consider believing in him? And he said, well, you couldn't do that. I said, no. If I meet your standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, if I meet your standard, would you consider believing in him? And he said, no. And I've had a lot of scientific people say no to me. And I go, well, there you go. So you've already decided. It's not based on the evidence. It's based on your preference that there's no God. And I don't argue with them. I said, that's okay. You've made your decision. God gives us free will. You don't have to go to heaven if you don't want to. God won't make you go to heaven. And so you've already decided. And that's okay.
Because really,
they're really surprised. I don't want to argue anymore. I go, well, there's nothing I can say.
Yeah, really, there is a belief system there, isn't it? They are coming from their own belief system.
It absolutely
and
is.
reading their bias into their conclusions, I would imagine. So,
well, and that's how you find out. You ask those questions. Well, if I could prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that God created everything, would you consider believing in him? I mean, any logical person has to say yes. Well, I've had a lot of so-called scientific people say no. I said, well, there you go. It's not based on science, though, is it? It's based on your preference, and that's your decision.
Yeah, thank you for the discussions we've had today. It's been really good. I just want to conclude the podcast by, if there's anyone listening that really is mulling these things over in their mind, and it's been something they've been pondering. Of course, there's a lot more technology and research going on. And more things being discovered that actually corroborate with the Bible.
All of Jerusalem, where we just left in Bethel, everything from Tel Dan, where we have the inscription from the house of David. At one point in time, that was a myth. Was David even real? Then we find some pieces of a palace inside the city of David, and people still go, well, maybe David's just a myth. We find Tel Dan, and it says from the house of David. That is all the way up until Dan in the north. Then you've got everything in the Galilee area. You have all this archaeological and scientific evidence for there. We've got everything in Haifa, and above it, we can go all the way down to Ashkelon, Ashdod. These archaeological parts that have been dug, and they're there for the world to go and see. It's just no one talks about them. They don't go there. They don't film them and show the archaeological evidence. And again, you're going to have the experts, these field of experts, the archaeologists and the scientists. We find the evidence, they agree on what we find, but then you have different conclusions. And this is where we, as Bible-believing followers of Yeshua, we can read the Word, look at the evidence that the experts find, and we can clearly apply it 100% to exactly, and the time periods themselves. And we can go from spot to spot to spot, from Joshua coming across to King David and Solomon, to Hezekiah and his tunnel and the broad wall in Jerusalem, to King Herod, to the time of Yeshua. It's all there, and it's very simple by taking what the experts have found and applying it to our scripture.
What advice would you give them if they're starting to be drawn in this direction of wanting to know more of the truth of the Bible? Yes.
Well, first of all, the Bible says, seek and you will find, knock and it'll be open to you, ask, it'll be given to you. God is waiting in the wings for you to engage your heart towards him and to seek the truth. And Jesus said the truth will set you free. And if you're trying to figure out whether you believe these things, I think we've said enough. I think there's a lot of evidence. I think it's time for you to go crack open the New Testament, maybe see what Jesus himself said. And ask God, say, God, if you're real, if these things are true, help me to understand them, to know them, because, I'd rather be in your kingdom than lost. And for somebody who's dealing with others, like we started out our discussion is, you've got people in your life, maybe they're skeptics. I want to assure people, Jesus said, my sheep hear my voice. And so we do not have to be brilliant. There's no pressure on us. We just have to be willing. We get some of these things into our quiver and be prepared to ask those very simple questions. Hey, do you believe everything came out of nothing? Look at the great discussion you can get from that. And so be prepared to speak the truth, because Jesus said, my sheep hear my voice. We have to be the ones to speak for Jesus. We're his ambassadors. He does the rest. And it's not about our eloquence, as Paul said. It's just about our willing heart, and that God opens the doors of opportunity. And so if God's opened your heart today and you're like, gosh, I really think these things are true. Gosh, there's so many resources, but just go to Jesus yourself and tell him, look, I have sinned. I know I've sinned. I know that your heaven is perfect, and I repent of my sins. I want to know you. I want to give my life to you. I want to trust you. I want to accept you for the payment of my sins. I know you're a man of history. You're a real guy. All the evidence proves it. So I want to trust in you. So I mean, we could say a lot more, but there you go.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the verse in 1 Peter that says, always be ready to give a defense to anyone or everyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear. And I truly think you've given us a lot of resources to help us in that today. So
thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed this. Yeah,
thank you for coming on. So with your resources and where you are, can you let us know how people can tune in to listen to your show and find you online?
Sure. So online, I do use a Rumble account. So mine is Wendy's Words for Him on Rumble. You go onto Rumble, just put that in the search bar. I have 3 different channels. And then the main one is the Wendy's Words for Him radio. So you can hear my previous radio shows, and I post them up there when I'm done. So you can go that way. And then I have a website, mywordsforhim.com, mywordsforhim.com. And you can get hooked up that way. And of course, I'd love for you to write to me if I can give my email.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. wscott@mywordsforhim.com. wscott@mywordsforhim.com. Write to me any questions you might have. I really love to answer skeptical questions or problems or questions about sharing the faith, and I'd love to hear from you.
That's fantastic. And another one that comes to mind with the experts is John Lennox. Have you heard much from him?
Yeah, well, actually, that's something I'm willing to look at more. Why don't you tell me a little bit?
Yeah, John Lennox, he was a professor at Oxford University.
Oh.
And he's debated people like Richard Dawkins and other.
Oh, yes, I have heard of him. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, he's really just incredible gift to really demonstrate complex truths in simple language and so many of these atheists are often stumped by what he says, and just amazing to see. Like you say, we've got the truth on our side as believers in the Bible. So
yeah, we can have the confidence. They actually. I mean, I've engaged people with doctorates, and they cannot adequately answer. So we don't, fear not. What man can do to us. We just ask for boldness and just speak the truth. And like I said, keep it simple. Did everything come out of nothing? That breaks the laws of physics. And can life create itself out of non-living chemicals? I mean, those 2 things alone will get you far with most people.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David.
Thanks, Wendy. Take care.
You too.
Are you searching for a podcast that discusses the most important issues of our day, all from a Christian perspective? Then add Rise Radio to your podcast playlist. Rise Radio explores topics that are shaping our world: philosophies, social narratives, belief systems, prophecies, strange phenomena, as well as spirituality. No topic is off limits. Rise Radio is about sharing the good news of Jesus Christ across the planet. Listen now on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, Buzzsprout, and wherever you get your podcast. Rise above the noise. Discover the truth. Tune into Rise Radio on your favorite podcast player right now.